In this exciting episode, Perry gives an amateur photographer some unwanted exposure. It's about time someone did. It's Season 2, Episode 6 of Perry Mason, The Case of the Buried Clock. Welcome to the Perry Pod. I'm your humble host, Jonathan Searcy, and my purpose here is pretty simple: provide an audio companion to the greatest legal drama in television history, Perry Mason. I plan to do a pod for every episode of the television series, and as time permits, I'll look at some of those made-for-TV movies too. I'll be working through the series in the order in which the episodes were aired. Each episode I'll give a brief refresher on the plot, and if the episode was based on a novel, I'll compare the book with its television adaptation. Next, I'll list some key pieces of trivia, as well as tackle the episode's main theme. We'll feature a Perry proverb, a moment of wisdom from the man himself, and then we'll finish with a post-case water cooler, where just like Perry, Della, and Paul, we can rehash the ins and outs of their adventures. But first, to the law library! Each episode in the law library, we return to prior cases to refresh our memories about Perry's past, so we can find fresh precedents for future cases. In this episode, we see our man Paul Drake take the witness stand.
Mr. Drake, when you arrived at the decedent's house at 7:55, was the defendant there?
Yes, he was.
It's the first time in the show that Paul himself has been a witness in court. We've seen his operatives take the stand, notably in the case of the fan dancer's horse. And Della, in what is my single favorite sequence from Season 1, we get her tete-a-tete with Hamilton Berger, and Perry showing that once again, three's company.
Miss Street, did you give to Mr. Perry Mason any envelope that you received at 1427 Crane Avenue?
Objected to, as assuming facts not in evidence.
As for Perry, he even gets called to the stand in the case of the Sunbather's Diary.
I realize this is highly irregular. Mr. Mason has already appeared before the grand jury. And although I hate to say so, it's possible that he may be an accessory in this case.
I understand, Mr. Berger. Mr. Mason, will you take the stand?
So welcome to the club, Paul. All that's left now is for Hamilton Berger to take the stand, and we'll have every single major star of the show having at least appeared as a witness. Without further ado, let's get to the plot of our episode. The Case of the Buried Clock. There's trouble in Sierra City. Marriage trouble. Big surprise, I know. Ersatz banker Jack Hardesty has taken his wife Sue for a ride. And Sue's dad, too.
Doc, I got a kind of a confession to make.
What is it this time?
Well, the fact is, I seem to have stolen a little money from the bank.
I might have known. How much?
Just about all of it, I guess. All the cash, that is.
Fun fact, one way you know Hardesty's a loser, the dude is driving a 1958 Ford Edsel convertible. This is a car whose name has come to signify commercial lemonosity. So, well done, Jack Hardesty. That's some pretty self-conscious characterization on your part. In this episode's casting recall, we've got Tanner from the case of the haunted husband as Jack Hardesty. We've got Doc Norris from the case of the drowning duck as Doc Blaine. The defendant from the case of the runaway corpse as Sue, Doc Blaine's daughter. And then the murderer from the case of the green-eyed sister is Rodney Beaton, the Van Dyke beard-wearing photographer. Everybody's getting a callback. So Jack Hardesty, he's stolen some money. There are complications, as always. Doc Blaine is on the hook, for Jack's stolen money because he himself put up the insurance so the bank would hire Jack.
How did you find out about it?
He told me and laughed. Oh, he knows I guaranteed his bond, so he made me a proposition. He said he'd return $75,000 if I'd make up the rest and not prosecute.
Also a problem? Sue Hardesty has struck up an extramarital relationship with somebody who lives near her father's lodge.
For a long time now, there's been nothing between Jack and me. I'd have divorced him, but he threatened to make a scandal. For no reason, really. Then. But lately, I've been seeing Phil Stragg. We've been meeting at Dad's house, the one in Sierra City, that is.
Then, the cops apparently don't believe Doc Blaine's story.
But the district attorney had another angle on that, Paul. He said there was only Dr. Blaine's word that Hardesty had stolen the money, that Dr. Blaine could have been in league with his son-in-law.
In court, defending Doc Blaine, Perry faces off against the crew that challenged him in the case of the Angry Mourner, Season 1, Episode 7. A team that includes the venerable District Attorney Darwin Hale.
Good morning, Mr. Mason. Welcome to Sierra County again.
Good to see you again, Mr. Hale.
The major question in this case: what does a buried clock have to do with anything? Now, I know it's the title of the episode, but we only get a hint for most of the episode that photography is involved. It's not until Perry puts Sue's paramour, Phil Stragg, on the stand that things really start rolling.
If I were walking along in the woods at night and suddenly the blinding brightness of a flashbulb exploded in my face, I believe it would startle me, Mr. Stragg. Yet apparently on the night in question, this did not startle you at all. I ask you, why not?
Well, I don't know. I guess I was thinking about something. Concentrating, you know.
But you not only did not stop, you did not even slow down.
Intriguingly, we do not get a confession from Mr. Stragg. Here is his last word.
Now, when the alarm went off and tripped the camera, you and your wife were at Jack Hardesty's home, having made a date with him there for 7:30. Which one of you did the killing, Mr. Stragg?
No! You can't drag me into this. I went along with the scopolamine to get the money, but I want no part of the murder.
No, I tell you, it's a lie. He can't prove that. He can't prove a thing.
In fact, in the denouement, Perry admits that he didn't know he was going to strike it rich with Phil's testimony, but at least it lets Della tell a groan-worthy joke.
It all proves one thing. Stragg made his biggest mistake when he buried the clock. Everybody knows that's no way to kill time.
Ooh.
The episode was based on a 1943 novel. There are some differences worth noting. Note the year. The novel begins with a wounded war vet hanging out with Adele Blaine. Neither of these characters is featured in the episode. The wounded war vet is gone altogether. Adele Blaine is the younger sister of a character who's very much like Sue. Neither character makes the cut. It looks like the pair will be a love interest for the novel, but nothing really comes of it. In fact, neither of them are defendants or play much part in the novel's action. It just shows that Earl Stanley Gardner was aware of the fact that he was writing during the war, and that there were going to be wounded young men returning home after combat. Number 2, the book gives us a different defendant. Jack's wife, who's called Millicent, not Sue in the book, is the defendant, not her father. Also suspected of the crime, Sue's older doctor friend, Jefferson Macon. And there's no hint that she's connected to Mr. Stragg in the novel. She, in fact, seems to have a loving relationship with this older doctor in town. Number 3, the novel offers a really long, complicated explanation of sidereal time, which is where you tell time by the stars rather than by the sun. And we also learn that Franklin Delano Roosevelt put the entire country on perpetual daylight savings time starting in 1942. So there's a lot of references to time. The way that the buried clock figures in the novel is much more explicit than in the show. Number 4, wanted to read this passage from the book, which seemed poignant. Again, published in 1943, I'll leave it without comment. Mason grinned. Quote, "There are no ethics," he said, "when you're dealing with the police, or I should say when the police are dealing with you. You're supposed to be bound by ethics. The police don't have ethics. They act on the assumption that they're getting the truth, whereas you are protecting a criminal." "That doesn't seem right," Della said. "Of course," Perry answered, "you have to admit, the police are trying to solve crimes. They sincerely believe that everything they do has a tendency to uncover the truth, that anything they're stopped from doing is a monkey wrench in the machinery. Therefore, they look on all laws which are passed to protect the citizen as being obstacles thrown in front of the police." End quote. Again, 1943. Final comment here, number 5. In the book, Mr. Stragg's camera trickery, which goes down very much like the episode describes, only provides him with an alibi for an after-the-crime cover-up, wherein he sneaks into the Blaine house to steal some paperwork and actually ends up assaulting a security man. That's where he uses trick photography. That's what Perry uncovers in court. And then, as is his wont in the novel, he does not elicit a confession from the real murderer who's on the stand. In fact, Perry sits at home in his office and explains what happens to Paul and Della and lets the district attorney wallow around trying to prove all of it in court. Now, let's get trivial, shall we? Each episode in our trivia section, I give you 3 takeaways. Number 1, a Paul is a subject worth investigating more. Number 2, a Della is something about a particular actor or actress who appears in the episode. And number 3, a Perry is something we learn about our intrepid hero. Our Paul. We get a pretty interesting discussion of scopolamine in this episode.
Will you please describe the nature of this scopolamine drug to the court?
Well, it submerges certain inhibitory areas of the brain without affecting other functions.
Might it be used as sort of a truth serum?
Yes, definitely in some cases. It leaves the memory, hearing, and powers of speech unimpaired. However, it's not as dependable as sodium pentothal.
Paul prompt for this episode. What use does scopolamine have in the 21st century? More specifically, are its uses illicit, or are there respectable deployments of this second-tier truth serum? Our Della this week concerns Don Beto, the veteran character actor who portrays our defendant, Doc Blaine. He was the husband of the murderer, failed defense attorney, in the case of the drowning duck.
Maybe the man was innocent, maybe guilty, I don't know. But I do know that the way I set up the defense is what killed him.
Here, he's a pipe-smoking bank executive. Beto was born in 1903 in Pennsylvania. His dad was a Welsh classical singer, and Don went to college at the University of Cincinnati and taught English for 3 years. I love it. Before he decided to pursue acting full-time. He started acting on Broadway in the late 1920s and became an accomplished character actor in Hollywood. He appeared in over 250 films and numerous TV shows. There's a pretty funny clip of Beto sporting a British accent and sparring with the Three Stooges in a 1939 film that you can find on YouTube.
Gentlemen, I'm Mr. Rumsford. Are you looking for someone?
I'm Zilla.
I'm Zola.
In fact, for someone who is really a classic that guy, I didn't know this guy's name even though I knew I'd seen him before. He has more YouTube tribute videos than logic would dictate. So if you're interested in seeing what he looked like in various other roles, there's a 1960s episode of Bewitched where he portrays Santa Claus. There are various other film roles he's appeared in that you can see stills of or clips from. Just go check it out. If you want more Don Beto in your life, it's available for the having. Beto died of natural causes in 1991 at the age of 87. Hats off, Don. Our Perry this episode involves our intrepid hero's knowledge of photography. Just listen to the specificity of this question.
Let's see how much of your photography you can remember. For instance, if you stop a lens down to f/22 or 32 without changing the shutter speed, you will virtually eliminate any exposure. Does that sound right?
Now we know he knows his way around a camera shop as a result of the case of the half-wakened wife. But this is either really strong reconnaissance by Perry, or it reveals that he already knew a little about the trade before the case began. In either scenario, that's something worth knowing about our hero. The theme for this episode is time. Cue the Chamber Brothers. Della ends the episode with a bad joke about killing time. But it's not funny when you waste time, and it's an important resource in Perry's world. It's really Sue who bears the brunt of this. Just check this out at the end of the case. She's got all the time she was married to Jack. Sunk cost, total loser. More than that, she has whatever time and emotional investment she gave in her relationship to the already married and murdering Phil Streg. Also a sunk cost, also a bummer. And then finally, we've just got the simple wear and tear on her car as she drives 90 minutes every weekend to and from the Fair Lake Valley Lodge. That's 3 hours a week that she could be using. I don't know, maybe she likes listening to the radio, but I was just thinking about that. An additional 3 hours a week she's by herself in the car. Now the episode ends apparently with them finding the money, but no amount of money is going to get back the time that Jack and other various situations have stolen from Sue. So you might as well bury those minutes. You're not getting them back. Now it's time for a Perry proverb. Perry seems so in command so much of the time that it's hard to imagine him doing anything speculative in the courtroom. I mean, Hamilton Berger's always asserting that Perry is making it up as he goes along, going on a so-called fishing expedition. But in this episode's denouement, Perry explains there's another analogy for what he's doing on cross-examination.
You know, cross-examination is like prospecting. You see something that looks promising, you work a vein for all it's worth. If you're lucky, you may hit a bonanza.
It's A-okay if I don't know the way bonanza. Gonna hope and pray that I find the way as I cross-examine Phil Streg. Now, let's grab a swig from the water cooler.
You know, there is one thing I don't understand.
Go on, Paul.
Our research prompt from the last episode involved broken wing fixation.
I quarreled with Dr. Harris about that very thing. He called it my broken wing fixation.
John Searcy and Myra Caraway sent me articles indicating that it is in fact a real concept in popular psychology. You might find its title expanded. I found the most entries on it by searching for bird with a broken wing syndrome that identified the syndrome as belonging to a person who is prone to look for relationships where they have to nurse a wounded person back to health. And that wounding can be literal or figurative. What intrigued me is that the fixation or syndrome had far more currency in popular discussions of psychology and, for instance, appeared in multiple movies, TV shows, and books than it did in professional literature. So I could not find the DSM-approved professional diagnosis that would match the broken wing fixation. And as I did a little more research, I discovered a couple of wrinkles. One, while broken wing syndrome or fixation focuses on the state of the person who's being helped, so somebody who has broken wing fixation is somebody who's focused on someone else who has a broken wing, right? White knight syndrome is a pretty common term used in both popular and professional literature for a person who feels the need to rescue someone from distress. Note, this term is most often used for men. Also interesting, while you will not find discussions of broken wing syndrome in the professional literature, you will find in professional psychological journals that are writing about altruism, that's selfless concern for others, a discussion of broken wings. And here's how. The bird, the killdeer, when a predator approaches and threatens the killdeer's young, the killdeer will pretend to have a broken wing so as to draw the predator away from the more vulnerable youth, and then at the last moment fly away so the predator can't get her. So here, the broken wing is a fake out by the person in question so as to protect someone else who is even more at risk. Which leads me to the question, does Perry have a broken wing fixation himself? I mean, there's a bunch of sad sacks who this guy defends, right? I say no, because too many of these episodes end with him kicking it with Paul and Della instead of trying to play armchair psychiatrist or helpmeet or nurse for his characters. I mean, he will help his clients if he can, but he's not simply drawn to someone just because they're wounded. A couple more pieces of business that I forgot to take care of last episode. I've been getting some really good emails and I just haven't kept up with them. First, my dad noticed that in the case of the sardonic sergeant, a scene in Major Lessing's office, there is a flowchart that is titled Flowchart, and he got a kick out of this. And I just wanted to offer this prompt. If you notice small details in the show that are not pot shots, like, say, something that's obviously bad acting or something that you're essentially making fun of, but something that's quirky, something that you notice because you've watched the episode now 25 times, you like a line reading, you like a tiny detail, send them to me. I want to know. I get a lot of delight out of those kinds of things. Second, I had a wonderful email a couple weeks ago from Chris Snyder, a listener, who asked a question about the case of the Curious Bride. I had a couple episodes before I got to that one, and then I got to the Curious Bride last week and failed to answer his question. So I wanted to answer it here and offer it as a prompt to anyone else because I just have a hypothesis. Here's Chris's question. Quote, "The times mentioned in the show seem so late in the day. Why is that? For example, in the case of the Curious Bride, the defendant gets a flat tire and the gas attendant tells her he's about to close at 2 a.m. In other episode, Perry seems to meet clients at 11 p.m. or later. Those times really seem late to me. Do you have theories or opinions on the times mentioned? Thanks." Great question. It's not something I had really thought about before, so I had to sort of like I said, I have a hypothesis, and there is a really conspicuous amount of late night outings for Perry. And I think the precedent really gets set in season 1, episode 1, The Case of the Restless Redhead, when Perry calls Paul up in the middle of the night to trace a gun, and Paul's asleep.
Find out who bought it, where, and when.
Perry, won't this keep until morning?
You've plenty of time. I'll be back at the office in 1 hour. I'd like it then. Bye.
Overall, Chris, I think the implication, even from this first episode, is that Perry is an all-night lawyer, 24/7. Someone who does what he does in the courtroom, but knows that that's normal working hours, and the real hot spot for getting things done for when action goes down is actually late at night. So in the novels, Perry is really a man of action, up at all hours, eating, detecting, plotting. And that certainly is the implication we have for the TV character too. Add to that the nature of Perry's work, the fact that he's dealing with crimes that are more likely to happen at night than in the morning, under the cover of the dark, rather than in open daylight. And I think you have a recipe for all the late night hours that get mentioned in the show. If someone else has a comment on Chris's question, please let me know. As always, I love feedback about this particular episode or the podcast in general. Was there something about this episode you'd like to comment on, or something that you'd like to correct? You can leave comments on the pod's website at theperrypod.libsyn.com, or you can email me at theperrypod@gmail.com. You'll find those links in the show notes. All Perry Pod episodes are available via Spotify and YouTube and iTunes, and I am really, really grateful for those of you who are joining me on this pod journey. Join us next time when Perry defends another person who's working late at night. It's the case of the married moonlighter. Join me, won't you? Until then, this is Jonathan Searcy saying, keep on walking that Park Avenue beat!